Anyway, they just
They've done it
his
anyway.
IT.
Well, that's something that, that starts to raise alarm bells, doesn't it?
But it is being supported and giving access to specialist help, but did he refuse to come in and be interviewed? That's the question everybody needs to have answered. So these are all sorts of, what it seems to me we've got is potentially, I'm not saying I know what's going on, it's possibly innocent guy who is being set up by the press and by the police. And we've got that was the Labour Metro Mayor, Dan Norris, who's outgoing. They've now got a new Metro Mayor. And the other one is this guy who's now taking money from some company. He left us Marvin Rees, who was the Bristol Mayor, who's now in the House of Lords, and he's got off scot-free. It seems to me that everything is becoming absolutely twisted by the British justice system.
Well, all justice systems are not infallible, and all of these things are, this is the bread and butter of, political analysis and trying to understand what's going on. It's not different in Britain or in west of England or Bristol or anywhere else. All these, if you don't want to watch how sausages are made because I don't want to eat these sausages anymore.
No, that's right, you're probably right actually. But anyway, we like to look at all these things and ask the question. None of the mainstream press here in Bristol seems to have done about, I tried to contact Dan Norris to get a reply, I've done my bit. So rather than go on for the election straight away, Martin, you sent me an article, quite an interesting one recently, about Nick Land and about the accelerationism. This, I think, is one of the reasons why people have become so disillusioned with politics, so demoralised, I suppose, is that there is just this sense that actually the special interests have completely taken over politics and nobody's going to get anywhere near power and actually is looking out for the people.
Well, that's very much an accurate description of the truth, isn't it? We were just talking earlier about how much money is involved in politics now in the US and in Britain. And of course, the more money is required. I mean, in Scandinavia, you used to have political parties that were funded by the state, and that was all the money they were allowed to have. Whereas, of course, political parties now basically can just get their money from anywhere, and politicians can get their money from anywhere. And so you end up at the end of the line with people like Zelensky, who's made millions and billions through being president of Ukraine. But, we can get into it.
So you sent me an article from a website called Dark Futura, .substack.com. The title of it is Hyperorganisation. I think this is the one you sent me, Martin, is it? So it talks about the Adam Curtis film, saying that everyone in the Soviet Union knew the system was failing, but no one could imagine any alternative to the status quo. Politicians and citizens alike were resigned to maintain the pretense of a functioning society. It sounds like here, look at it, definition of self-fulfilling prophecy can be viewed in the vein of, this is where we get into Nick Land. Nick Land's he has something called hyperstition. Have you come across that?
I didn't read it, and I can't remember what it was.
I'll just read the quote. What is hyperstition? Is a cultural belief, especially a work of fiction, that makes itself real. A cultural self-fulfilling prophecy where some cultural idea or hype truly brings about the thing it describes. I mean, we're talking here about echoes of the USSR and the Adam Curtis documentary explaining it, but it's also the same with Nazi Germany, isn't it? This idea they created in the 1920s and 30s of the sort of German master race and this fictional version of German history.
Well, that's right. In other words, what Land is suggesting there is that people in positions of influence can create realities by narrative means, and you can see that because of the social media network in which most people are embedded now, they can be sold completely false narratives, and yet because everybody else seems to be going along with it, and you go along with it as well, because there's a natural tendency for people to go along with people because that's what people do.
Groupthink, isn't it? Yeah. So the mainstream media doesn't come off with smelling the roses either.
Maybe it's another
We're saying that social media is used to do this, but actually the mainstream press, I mean, one obvious one is the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq we were talking about last week with David Halkin.
Yes, I think what happens is that the mainstream media doesn't have the kind of power that it used to have, but social media being seen as a countervailing has also been the chimera because social media itself is extremely manipulative, which is why you've got things like Brigade 77, the British Army's social media arm. You just sit there all day blogging.
And Facebook and algorithms.
Yes.
You know, this is a very important way of just like sending stuff up or down in terms of readability,
And so
popularity.
it's actually more hands-on in terms of getting into people's brains than just broadcasting a live TV presentation.
So Hypernormalisation is a 2016 BBC documentary by British filmmaker Adam Curtis. It urges that following the global economic crisis of the 1970s, we were talking about with Stephen Dodd a couple of weeks ago, governments, financiers and technological utopians gave up on trying to shape the complex real world and instead established a far simpler fake world for the benefit of multinational corporations. It's kept stable by neoliberal governments.
Well, I mean, Adam Curtis is an interesting filmmaker, and his films are full of very useful footage because he's got access to the BBC's full archives.
Well, he's an archivist. He's like someone like Alan Frankovich, or you know, there's actually quite a few of them out there. I spend. I mean, you know, another one we've had on recently, Todd Ryder, spends hours and hours, months and months sitting in archives, pouring through bits of microfilm and taking pictures of them and this sort of thing, getting records from the archives.
What I would say about Curtis, though, is he tends to see conundrum, and that it's all to do with
Again, I think he's way Adam Curtis puts it. I mean, for example, with the Century itself, Power of Nightmare, he's saying actually, look, the whole idea that you are voting for something which you all don't get. To get it, you know, there's a whole bunch of myths which are now being sold that they might get and then they might not get.
Yes.
And the likelihood is no chance you're not going to get any of it.
No, but I think I find his films a bit like candy floss. So you actually get to the end and you think, well, what is going on? And for example,
This is a bit cruel to him, really.
I think it's a bit cruel because somebody like Frankovich nailed down Gladiator. Nailed it down. Yeah.
He's not the same person as I mean, what Adam is doing. He's looking at trends and patterns and the overall.
Yes.
I mean,
So in other words, it's a bit more airy-fairy.
The Mayfair sale was a very good job, I think, of looking at what Thatcherism was doing, privatisation, selling off the family silk, public showing you who was doing it and what were their real motives, the way they were selling it to the
Yes,
public.
well, I mean, I get he's far superior to the mainstream stuff, but I'm still personally dissatisfied because there's not enough that you can do for then until the film.
That's pretty much the flaw, wasn't it? Looking at the origin of all the Americans and the Saudis at the end of the war.
I mean, there's an element of conspiracy files in the way that he puts it.
Maybe in Hypernormalisation.
In other words, you know, he says, and when many people came to believe that Kennedy had been assassinated, it wasn't in fact the case. There were real conspiracies. You know, and so in other words, he's playing a limited hand out.
Nobody knows how Hypernormalisation gets everything.
No, I mean,
we don't.
he's got access to the BBC archive and he's allowed to do his stuff because he isn't going to come out. Actually, I've discovered that 9/11 was an inside
They do
job.
try and keep a lid on that. They do try and keep a lid on Adam Curtis. That last one, The Bitter Lake, which is I think absolutely fascinating. They didn't show it on even on BBC Four or anywhere on the television. It was online only.
That's right. So in other words, he's a kind of tolerated dissident within the BBC system.
Barely tolerated.
Yeah.
I mean, at least he probably got paid for what he did.
Well, that's
but
right.
you know what?
At least he's allowed to make a living.
This reminds me of Tim Tate's, oh gosh, not the Paranormal, what was it called? Conspiracy of Silence. He got paid, I think he told me, was it $500,000 to make that documentary, Conspiracy of Silence, by Discovery Channel. And then they sold not screening.
But he got the money.
But he got the money, and also it's out there if you want to watch it. It's about Boys Town. It's about the use of male child prostitutes in Washington, the way they were being farmed, basically. That was because Boys Town and brought to Washington to be used to blackmail politicians in the United States. But you know, you get paid, you make the film, and then somebody tells us where we go.
The channel will be really people saying if you do this, all these people are going to sue.
Yeah, or the CIA phone the boss up saying don't show it. It might be just that simple. There's a great article I thought this on this bizarre Dark future. This is where you hang out now, is it? During the week.
Well, I try and I spend a lot of time reading on the internet, more than I ought to, really. And it's been, you know, it's a dark world, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think it's also important. See, it's articles like that I would like to see more in mainstream newspapers, so, you know, the Mirror, the national papers, so you can only get this is completely taboo, really, acceleration. The only thing I've seen really much about it has been there was a Sky Arts programme called Accelerate or Die.
Well, I think what's happened, actually,